So a couple of weeks ago, I was invited down by Atlus and Sega over to New York for a unique chance to get an early access taste of Metaphor ReFantazio, their brand new IP RPG that's clearly inspired by elements from many of their previous series, such as Persona and Shin Megami Tensei. Before I get into my thoughts about the actual game and what I experienced, I want to talk a little bit about the trip itself. They invited us over to this cool studio area that I think was like originally a church that was then like redone to be used for like events like this. But it did lead to a nice opportunity right after we finished playing the game where we got to get a cool reverse Q&A with the devs. And while the director, Hashino-san, wasn't here, he's also the director that did a number of the previous Persona games, he did leave us a really nice message and was even nice enough to, beforehand, sign these cool little, like, notebooks that are themed after the game. It's really neat. And actually, after I met with the other devs, too, I actually asked them if they'd be willing to sign as well, and they were kind enough to do so. So thank you to everyone who did that. It was a pleasure. But we did meet the producer, the battle designer, as well as the event and story coordinators. And it was really nice just talking with them and seeing their excitement, because they're really excited about this game. As they should be, because this game is something special. I'm really feeling it. So without further ado, let me go over my thoughts and feelings on the bit I played as we look into the gameplay and a bit of the story of Metaphor ReFantazio.
One has to ask, them dead, who shall take the throne?
If I had to describe Metaphor in just a few words, I would say it feels familiar, but different. It has a lot of the elements that you've seen already in previous projects by Atlus. The battle system has Atlus's patented attack the weakness to allow you to earn extra turns, with the churn meter at the top acting a lot more like a Shin Megami Tensei game than Persona. Yet the classes you summon that also act as your abilities act a lot like Personas. Similarly, you can also form bonds with other characters, also similar to the social links that you form with characters in Persona games. And in doing so, this unlocks additional classes as well as more abilities for your current ones. And while my playthrough here only accounts for about the first 2 hours of the game, I feel like I'm still barely scratching the surface of what this game has to offer. But what is here has me very excited. So I'm not going to summarize the events that happen in this first few hours because I wouldn't want to spoil that experience for anyone. But I will discuss some of my overall thoughts on the game's systems, as well as maybe 1 or 2 moments that really stood out to me. First, let's talk a little bit about the world itself, the United Kingdom of Uchronia. There's a number of tribes, and a lot of these tribes don't seem to like each other very much. In particular, our protagonist, who is part of the Elda tribe, which has been ostracized by the wider society for being tainted with the inheritance of forbidden magic. Exactly what that means and entails, we don't really know, but there aren't too many of these Elda left. We seem to be a bit of a rare commodity. But I really like the aesthetic that the game gives across, with the pristine white city of the capital located within this vast desert that you encounter early on in the game, surrounded by all forms of beasts that could pretty much one-shot you if you get anywhere near them. As you roam the streets, the capital's denizens are constantly talking and discussing all about all the rumors and the death of the king that has essentially sparked chaos and unrest throughout the entire kingdom. And while the king does have a prince, a son, he is sick and is seemingly unable to take the throne. So that sort of leads to who's it gonna be? There have been discussions of an election that it seems to be a big focus of this game, but that is actually not something that I really saw a ton of in these early portions. We are simply here on a quest to aid our childhood friend, which is this prince, and to find a way to lift the curse that has been placed on him. But the game's got a really great color palette, whether it's the dark and dingy areas like this attack on a castle keep, or down inside one of the mines, or even this lush forest section that you find in between areas. The game has a good amount of variety even in just these opening hours. I also really love the portraits that each of the characters have, which has been done by the resident artist for Atlus, Sojima. And while it is clearly his art style, it also has a bit of a twist to it, with each character kind of having a bit of a painterly style to it that I really like. One of the things I noted right off the bat, though, is that unlike all the other previous games with our protagonist, and this includes, I believe, both Shin Megami Tensei and Persona, our protagonist can talk. That's right, he's got an actual voice.
Right. What am I doing again?
And it's not that he just talks when you pick decisions. Occasionally he will just say something, like remarking at the start of a big fight.
Okay, let's give this all we've got.
The dev said that the reason behind this was that because this game takes place in a fantasy setting as opposed to a similar real world setting that we see in a lot of their other games, they felt it was important that this character have its own personality because we maybe can't put ourselves in their shoes as easily because we are new to this world. We don't understand its rules. Maybe like quite the same way that a character that's lived here for all these years would. But it leads to a very different feel from the usual Atlus fare, and I think that's good. It helps to sort of make this game stand out in its own way. That said, don't expect your character to necessarily be chatterboxing a ton. He's still relatively on the quieter side, with most of the dialogue and reactions coming from your little fairy sidekick here by the name of Gallica, who I came to really like. She's got a little bit of sass to her, but she's also very clearly cares about the protagonist and wants his best interest, with her showing concern towards the protagonist as prejudice from the townsfolk as well as the army is being slung your way.
I'd heard about what it was like in the capital, but still, when you hear and see all this prejudice out in the open, it's a lot. You okay?
It's very cute. However, easily the MVP of this game for me was absolutely our partner in crime that we encounter pretty early on, a noble by the name of Leon Stroll, who has actually been confirmed to be voiced by none other than Dion from Final Fantasy 16. Stroll's awesome. He clearly has his own reasons for fighting and being there, but also feels as a noble that he needs to protect the lower class. He doesn't immediately shun us like everybody else does, and believes it is the duty of the upper class to look out for their fellow man, to use the power and wealth that they have to better society. It also led to a really freaking awesome moment that legitimately was probably my favorite moment of this entire experience, which happened near the end of my play session. Stroll essentially has his awakening, which instead of a mask forming on our face that we rip off, involves us digging our hand into our chest and ripping out our very own hearts, which weirdly enough don't actually look like hearts, but like pieces of metal. At which point he puts his foot on top of a rock and then speaks into it like it's a microphone, and basically just gives this super hype ass speech as an entire crowd around him begins cheering. It was so sick. It legitimately had me just cracking up. I already just can't wait to learn more about this character and see where his story goes from there. Another big noteworthy thing about the game is its music, which again has been done by the GOAT himself, Shoji Meguro, who also did music for all the Shin Megami and Persona games. But unlike the metal grunge of Shin Megami Tensei or the whimsical, perhaps youthful feeling of a Persona game soundtrack, this soundtrack is led by strong orchestral instrumentals, as well as some beautifully sounding vocals and choir themes. Which, by the way, apparently all this music has been planted in our head by Gallica, because yeah, we gotta have something to listen to while we run around this big world. And I gotta say, I honestly love that intro theme that you get as you run around that starting desert area. It's so cool. What a cool way to start.
Watch out!
I also appreciate just sort of how unusual the battle theme is, with the vocals almost feeling like they're just trying to hype you up and get you just amped about all the action and stuff happening. It's got a very otherworldly feel to it. I also really enjoyed the very prestigious sounding, almost aristocratic kind of music that plays as you run around the royal capital of Grand Trad. In regards to this game's quote-unquote personas, which are referred to as archetypes in this game, they're apparently created through harnessing of our own anxiety, which is interesting, I guess relatable, taking the worries that haunt us and using it as power. But hilariously enough, this game's similarities to Persona don't just end there. A few hours in, you actually get introduced to a place called Academia, run by an academic that is seemingly in prison there by the name of Moore, who acts as your guide and in helping you empower your own archetypes. Very similar to a certain long-nosed man in a very blue room that we've seen previously. However, unlike Persona, characters are not necessarily locked to any one archetype. everyone can be freely changed to different ones. With even an interesting thing happening at the end of my play session where I granted an archetype's power to one of my comrades, which was an old wizened warrior by the name of Grius. So essentially you're actually bequeathing this archetype power onto certain people, and everyone at any point can change their class to something else. That's acting as wild cards. You see what I mean? It's familiar, but different. And of course, you can't talk about an Atlus game these days without talking about its insane UI. From the character messages and portraits and the way they pop up, with the battle UI looking so neat and stylized, and every action you make coming with a little flourish, to the main menu itself, which funny enough, I did not actually unlock until the very end of my PlayStation. At the start, you're given a very basic UI, but by the end, once you've unlocked a number of mechanics, do you finally actually unlock the main UI that we've seen in some screenshots. And man, oh man, I had to just take an opportunity, because I was sort of running out the time at this point, to go through all of the little menu points just to get a look at it all, because man, is it amazing. I cannot give enough credit to Atlus and team for their just insane UI work. It's just gorgeous. I've never been so engaged by going through a menu than I have for the last few Atlus games I played. It's truly peak. The battle system itself is very interesting in this game, as it takes place both in and out of a quote-unquote encounter screen. Instead of just running up behind an enemy and getting the drop on them like you do in most of their previous games, you can actually get a few hits off and potentially stun the enemy before entering squad mode, at which point you engage in the usual turn-based style battle system they are known for. And if you get strong enough, eventually enemies that are a much lower level than you will just die on the battlefield, which alleviates a lot of the grind of having to run into an encounter and deal with much weaker enemies. It's actually really cool, and you still get experience and money for killing them as well. One of the things I was actually curious about ever since seeing trailers and interviews about the system was, what happens if you don't press the Y button to initiate squad mode? It was actually one of the very first things I did when I got into a battle-prone area. I was wondering if maybe, even if it's an enemy that is, technically strong enough to enter a squad mode, maybe I could just potentially not press Y and instead just continue to smack them on the world map. And the answer is you can do that, but it's not that simple, because after you've hit them and initiated the squad UI to show up, if you don't press the button, the enemy will just fall to the ground with a bunch of invincibility frames, and you'll be unable to hit them any further until they get back up, and then you can start whacking them again. So technically you could, if you avoid their attacks from there, just continue to wail on them and dodge out of the way and wail on them and dodge out of the way, but it's not practical. It's much faster, honestly, to just enter squad mode than it is to try to do it that way. And of course, if the enemy manages to hit you at any point during that, they'll get the drop on you and get the first attack, and that could probably lead to some issues for stronger enemies later in the game. So yeah, best just to hit that triangle/Y button. But like previous games, you can also get just an instant stun on an enemy if you manage to attack them from behind. Normally it takes like 3 hits to be able to make them enter a stun state if they're looking directly at you. But if you manage to sneak up on them and hit them once from behind, they'll instantly be staggered. It's really cool. I dug it a lot. The game's turn-based combat starts off pretty simple, very much easing you into the process, as you don't actually start off with any archetypes until partway into a mission. But of course, once you do, oh boy, things start getting wild. Because seemingly the archetypes are the only ways to actually deal with the game's true main enemies, which are called, that's right, humans. But they don't look like humans. No, they look like some weird demons. Like this one you encounter early on, with daggers coming out of his legs, a weird owl head, and fruit just kind of bursting out of him. Also, with these larger human enemies, you can actually attack specific body parts to slowly weaken them and make the main body more prone to attacks. There's also a moment actually where Gallica, funny enough, offered to aid me in one of these fights. So this apparently will happen randomly during some fights. While Gallica isn't actually a playable character, she will occasionally aid the protagonist in special situations, which is cool. I think one final thing I want to talk about before wrapping up is discussing the interesting fantasy book, quote unquote, that we've been carrying around with us this whole time, that essentially describes a very similar sounding version of our world, with towers of glass that pierce the sky, and apparently one tribe that works together, which might not be exactly how it is in here in real life, but I almost like the idea that this story that they see as fantasy, right, is almost like a fantasy version of our world. It's a fantasy game with its own real world fantasy story within it that is also continuously being referenced to as you make your way through the game. talking about new passages and segments. And it does make me wonder, how crazy and meta is this game going to get? Because you see, before you even get into the main game, one of your first actions isn't naming your protagonist, but yourself. Yes, that's right. The person that you, playing this game, puts your name into the game. You do also name the protagonist as well, but it does make me wonder, how is that going to come into play the further you make your way in? From everything I saw at the start, there is no mention of us, myself, at least not by any of the characters, but I don't imagine that's going to stay that way forever. And I think the ideas and the theming behind this concept is what really has me the most intrigued about this game's story, and where it could potentially go as this race to become king or to save the prince takes us. I think that, on top of the fact that the demons are called humans, I think we're in for some really heady stuff that's going to be probably pretty awesome once potential big reveals are made. At least that's my theory. So yeah, I was really impressed by what I saw here. In a lot of ways, this game feels like Atlus's kind of magnum opus, where they're like taking things that have worked for them in the past and using it to make something completely new and different. And while there is a lot about this game that feels familiar, both its style and its theming and the music, and even just the smallest changes like our character being able to talk, does a lot to make it feel like a new experience. So I obviously feel like if you are already an Atlus fan, like you were a fan of Persona or you were a fan of Shin Megami Tensei, you should absolutely try this game. But I also feel like if you are a fan of just RPGs in general, you should definitely give this game a shot. I think a lot of people who maybe weren't as in tune with the high school setting of a game like Persona will actually find a lot of enjoyment here for this change in a really interesting fantasy setting with more adult characters too. And just even this little taste, this little sneak peek I've had, has me really excited to see where the story and its characters go and how the gameplay evolves over time. Because I really got a small, just like, look at the stuff that you could do. I don't even think I was really done with the tutorial of the game at this point. And the classes, the battle system really feel like they could get pretty wild. And I hope they do, because that's what makes this, like, the class systems in any video game, like, super freaking fun, right? But yes, I do want to give a huge thank you to Atlus and to Sega for inviting me down. It was also a pleasure to meet a number of other colleagues and creators, a number I've spoken to before, some I hadn't, but I've known about. It was a real pleasure just getting a chance to talk with them and hanging out for a few days. But the game releases October 11th, so if this sounds like it's up your alley, I would consider checking it out. Maybe give it a pre-order. They got some pretty cool little bonuses and I think a collector's edition too. But you guys can also expect me to be doing a full Let's Play of this game as well. And I can't wait, man. I really think this is got the potential to be something really special. So I really got to give kudos to Atlus and Sega for taking a risk like this and not just sticking to the same established IPs they've been doing now and branching out, you know, trying something new, because that can be tough. That can be scary. But I think it's something that will pay off for them, because I'm impressed, man. I'm impressed. But guys, I hope you all enjoyed this little sneak peek at Metaphor. If you did, please leave a like and a favorite. It really does help me out. And hey, if you're not already, why not consider subscribing? Become a picky penguin aboard the SLP, where the days are always sunny and the vids are always funny. And I'll also give you a heads up when I do actually get around to Let's Playing this game later this year. But anyway, guys, as always, till next time, stay classy.